lovely people, welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learn with you. This week's video is brought to you from the first operation of my Gumball Machine. You may have seen this particular capsule come out of my Gumball Machine in my video where I set it up. We are talking about This Bird Has Flown Today, more clearly noticed in this particular copy. I received this book as a winner of a Goodreads giveaway. I'm gonna be totally honest with you, we've got a big shout out to the Gumball Machine today because I signed up for this giveaway, forgot about it, won this giveaway, forgot about it, received the book, put it on my shelf, forgot about it. And the only thing that made me pick up this book was the use of my Gumball Machine. And a big shout out to my Gumball Machine because I did actually really enjoy this book. So if you don't know anything about This Bird Has Flown by Susanna Hoffs, let me give you a quick summary. Jane Start is a 33-year-old one-hit wonder from a decade ago, freshly out of a relationship with a cheater ex. On a much-needed break from reality provided by her manager slash best friend Pippa, she flies to London to write music and relaunch her career outside of the chains of her singles performance and the shackles of her cheater boyfriend. But things take a different turn when she meets a stranger on the plane. So let's get into my thoughts on this one. Jane has a very unique voice, and because she has such a unique voice, it leads to this really interesting internal monologue and perception of the world, and how she describes what she's seeing in the world is so different from what another character might have perceived. And it's a really interesting way of telling this story coming from this particular character. The conflict that was introduced by Tom, the stranger on the plane, is simultaneously predictable as well as handled really well. It's a very engaging way for the predictable circumstance to be carried out and navigated through during this story. While I could predict what the backstory was, the way that it affected the story in the future was very interesting. And that's to keep it vague. The way that Jane is constantly questioning her actions and second-guessing herself and checking in with her feelings and questioning whether or not this is the right thing to do makes what would normally be a very unsettling insta-love to me a lot more palatable, because at least the things that I'm thinking as a reader are also being thought of through this character, and I think that that ties into the way that she has a really unique way of talking and looking at the world. So having her internal monologue reflect some of my concerns as a reader makes me more engaged with her as an individual than it would have had she not been questioning these things. Because if she was like, oh my god, I met the stranger on the plane, I'm in love with him, I'm never gonna love anybody else, this is amazing, and had no questions about it, I would be like, not the book for me, I don't like that. But the fact that she's like, I really should not be moving in with this man. I really should not be moving in with this man. I know that I should not be moving in with this man, but I don't know how to express how strongly I want to do that. I don't know how to put the I know that I shouldn't be doing this thing in context with how badly I want to do this thing. Having that internal debate made it much more tolerable. I don't agree with her final decisions in the real world, but in terms of having a fictional story that is centered around a character, these are the best thoughts that I could expect anyone to have, and I really appreciated those. There's also an interesting thing that happens with the way that Jane is thinking throughout the story, how she's narrating the story. As she spends more time in England, the more time that she is there, the way that she narrates and the words that she uses shift. So you can kind of feel the passing of time because she starts to use more England-isms than she uses American-isms in her descriptions of things, and she starts to use more terminologies that are not standard American ways of describing things that I notice as an American, and I would bet that somebody who is reading this book from England might notice that they're using more things from their language structures and colloquialisms. You really feel the passage of time with that change, because you know how people who move to a different country will start to lose parts of their accent to fit in with the language that's used there and change how they emphasize things in certain phrases because that's not how people say it. For example, I say binoculars. I'm looking through some binoculars, and my partner says binoculars and he calls them binos for short. So maybe eventually I'll start calling them binos. I don't use them, so his language reference might be a better point than mine. Binocular. binocular. They both sound weird now, but like, you get it. Sometimes the people that you're around influence how you say things. So the more that you're around an entire different culture that says things entirely differently, you're gonna start saying things differently than you were at the beginning of your time. And I think that that's a really great detail that was put in that lets you feel the passage of time without being like, oh, it's been 6 months that we've been in London. You can feel it, you can hear it, and I love that little detail. The side characters in this story felt like they were imperative to Jane as a person, and not in the way that it's like, oh, these side characters only exist so that the main character can have them to interact with. It was more so like Jane couldn't exist without her side characters. They were so substantial to how Jane's mind works that she relied on them so heavily. I felt like all of the side characters were their own people. I felt like they all had their own things that they were doing, especially Pippa. But Jane needed them to like nullify how her brain was working, because she just did that like thinking spiral. Like the I shouldn't move in with this man, but I want to move in with this man. I don't know what the right thing to do is. She would go to Pippa and be like, I don't know what the right thing to do is, and have her as a bounce board. And I don't think that Jane would have been able to function as a person without having these side characters as her bounce board. She needed them to act as a voice of reason when she couldn't find one within herself, especially Pippa. We spend the most time with Pippa as a side character that is important, so she makes the strongest impact. It's also interesting to see how like side characters that don't interact directly with Jane impact how Jane perceives the world and how her mind is working. So like you have Amelia, who is Tom's ex, who acts like a ghost in the story. She's like fully ghostly in her presence in the story until she is corporeal. She is this concept that puts so much pressure onto Jane throughout the entire story that it's a very interesting dynamic, and I don't think you could have gotten that if Jane wasn't in her mind circling. So like you have Pippa nullifying her brain's systems and like being her voice of reason, and then you have Amelia, who is not really interacting with her personally, but acting as this kind of catalyst to her circling thoughts and doing the exact opposite of what Pippa does. But they're both side characters that fully influence who Jane is as a person. So some things that I think can be improved. I know I said that I think the side characters all had their own things going on, but at the same time, I felt like some of them had too much of their own things going on, and we didn't really need them for their story. They didn't really serve much purpose besides just adding bodies. So like, oh, Jane's not a crazy person, she's got friends. That felt like the kind of tool that they were being used as more than they were like integral to the story, and having them there was important for Jane. It felt like it was there for the reader's benefit more than it was there for Jane's benefit, and that's something that I think definitely needs to be thought about. Are your side characters there for the benefit of your main character, or are they just there so that your main character looks a certain way to your readers? So for Jane, Alistair and James didn't really feel like they served a purpose to Jane besides to have somebody else to participate in the conversation, as well as their daughter. It kind of felt like a diversity insert, even though it wasn't really necessary to have a diversity insert for this particular story. I think it kind of affects negatively if you put people who are more diverse in any kind of way into a story that they don't feel like they naturally fit into. It feels more like a spotlight on the differences than it does like a, hey, people are people kind of thing. And there are several Oxford professors that come up that don't feel like they add anything besides pointing out that you're at Oxford and there are professors around, and it's annoying as a reader who has a history of not being great with names to try and keep track of all of these people who don't actually impact the story so much as fluff it out. Because like you could have a history professor at Oxford, and I don't need to know their name to know that they're a history professor at Oxford and that there are history professors at Oxford if they're not going to be someone that I need to keep track of. I kept track of a lot of Oxford professors that I did not need to keep track of. Something else that I think can be improved but also could be perceived as a strength depending on the person who is discussing it is that there's a lot of references to music and art and literature, and these are things that are important to the characters, which is why it can be perceived as a strength as well. But I think that the amount of things that were referenced became distracting to the motion of the story, because there are some things that I knew what we were talking about. And I was like, oh, cool. But there were so many niche things that were like, this is a really niche thing. And we're discussing it like it's not a really niche thing. And then I Google it. I have to pull myself out of the book, go to my phone and Google, what are we talking about right now? Why is this an important image? And for some people, that might be great. That might be like, I get to learn something from this particular story. That might be a really exciting thing. But I don't love when a book takes me out of the story. If I wanted to learn something that like I have to dig deeper into, I would seek out more nonfiction content, because I don't want to have to stop reading to know what's going on to continue reading, you know? And that could be something that is really exciting to somebody else, and it's just something that doesn't sit well with me as a reader. If that's the goal of the book, if the goal of the book is to present like a stronger sense of these are things that are important that people don't have as much of a reference to, and I want to put it into a context that makes people want to have a context to it, then that's great. They did a great job of that. But if it's not, then I don't know, you know? So what can writers learn from This Bird Has Flown? It's never too late to start. You can get that from both Jane and Susanna Hoffs. They both start doing something later than is the prime idea of when to do things, because this is Susanna Hoffs' first book. This is the first time that she's discovered that she likes writing and she wants to tell stories. And this is also a story set with a 33-year-old woman trying to break into the music industry. You get that double experience of it's never too late to start from two very different perspectives. It's also a great example of hiding clues in plain sight for the reader. There's a lot of experiences in this story that are hints towards deeper meaning and a lesson that the main character is going to learn but hasn't quite seen yet. It does that really well. So if you're telling a story from a character that does not necessarily know how to do the thing yet, but you want readers to hold on to the fact that they're gonna probably do the thing, dropping hints like this is a really good way of doing that, and it's a very good example of thematic hints in the story. I also think it's a good example of when to stay in the moment of the scene, of like what's actually happening, what's going on in front of your character, and when to shift into their mind, when to break the scene and focus on like how your character is perceiving what's going on. What are they taking away from it? Because everything that happens in the real world happens simultaneously. You perceive things at the exact same time that they are happening. You can hear somebody talking and you can hear like how you are digesting their information, whatever your internal monologue is like. In books, you have to choose what is the focus. And sometimes you can be in the moment and also like this is the dialogue that's happening, and then you end your quotes and then you go into the thought process of the character and then you go back into the dialogue. Sometimes you have dialogue, and then you go back into the character's mind. I think this book does a great balance of shifting between those things. But that is all that I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you've read this book and you liked it or you didn't like it, leave me a comment talking about what your feelings were. If you haven't read this book, do you have any interest in reading it? Let's have a chat in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and you don't want to miss any of my other uploads, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. I am here once a week on either a Tuesday or a Saturday for a writing topic video on Tuesdays or a story study like this on Saturday. So I will see you guys next week on one of those days.